Agricultural and food policy lies at the heart of many pressing societal issues today, and economic analysis occupies a privileged place in contemporary policy debates. The food system is a complex network of activities and processes that involves the production, processing, transportation, and consumption of food. It also includes the infrastructure and inputs needed at each step, as well as the outputs generated. The food system can be broken down into a supply chain that includes many steps. But how does this system work? It is necessary to analyze the connections between agriculture and resource use, commodity trade, food businesses, and retail markets. In this special episode of the book series, I quote two professors who recently published a book entitled Food Economics, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health. This book was published by Palgrave Macmillan, and a copy of it can be accessed on the link that I'm going to paste right in the description panel on the upload for this video. This book is covered as part of the book series Studies in Agricultural Economics and Food Policy. Enjoy the show. Professor Amelia and Professor William, thank you so much for making the time today. I'm very happy to have you, viewers and listeners. Today we are set to discuss this new book. It is part of the Palgrave series on agricultural economics and food policy. This is a series that is edited by Professor Christopher Barrett, who is currently a professor of economics at Cornell University. So I'll start with the introductions. Professor Amelia, I'll give you the time to just tell us about yourself. Tell us where you're currently working, the courses that you're teaching, what you are researching about, and the work that you have been doing right before this publication.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for having us. So my name's Amelia Finaret. I teach nutrition and food economics at a small liberal arts college. It's called Allegheny College. And it's in Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is a pretty rural area. So we're like a couple hours from every major city. I also work at a small critical access hospital in a nearby town. Again, rural area. So my students and also my patients kind of live in these rural areas either while they're learning or while they're trying to deal with their food system. And I think it's definitely shaped a lot of what my interests are in thinking about food, especially the food economy. So I teach nutrition, I teach food econ, and I have a joint appointment with the Department of Global Health and the Department of Business and Economics. So that's been really nice for me because I really enjoy interdisciplinary work. And I like doing this in a liberal arts setting because liberal arts really does encourage students to have a broad-based approach to learning. So they really do get a lot of breadth in their training, and then they do get depth in that one area that they decide to major in as well. But I really think that everyone can benefit from learning economics, especially food economics, which is what we're going to be talking about. So I really love teaching in the liberal arts because it lets me kind of do that for students from like environmental science or international studies or lots of different kinds of programs and majors. So yeah, rural Pennsylvania for me. I've been living here for 9 years, and we like it here a lot. So thanks so much for having us.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. And I should say, your position as somebody who's at a liberal arts college was also reflected in the book, because I should say this is one of the books I've seen that is so interdisciplinary. You bring together economics, you bring together health issues, nutrition issues, policy. So this is exciting, and I believe it is going to reach a very wide audience because of that incorporation of so many other different disciplines. So I understand that both of you have joint appointments. That's very interesting. But let's hear from Professor William. This is your time.
Yes, thank you. Anotida, thank you so much for organizing this whole series, for doing all of this work. You've brought so many different books to the attention of lots of students, I think, around the world. So I'm at Tufts University. I teach in a graduate school of nutrition. The Friedman School of Nutrition covers all aspects of where food comes from, where food goes to. And I've been here for 14 years in the city of Boston, teaching students who want a career in the food system. These are graduate students, but previously I had taught at Purdue University, a land grant college of agriculture, in an agricultural economics department. I was there for 17 years. And in the course of both of these jobs, I've been able to do research around the world, but I actually began really in Africa, in Zimbabwe, actually. After university, I wanted to live in Zimbabwe in any way that I could. I finished university in 1984. Zimbabwe had just become independent. It was a very exciting place at that time. And I just really wanted to be there to experience it. And the only thing I could do there was to teach school. So I went to teach in a rural secondary school. And I had previously traveled quite a lot in Latin America, in Central America, across Europe. I'd worked on farms. And so connecting agriculture to health has been this sort of lifelong journey for me.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. I love Zimbabwe. I'm from Zimbabwe myself. And, I greatly appreciate that, it gave you the starting point for your career. It is exciting that we are now having to discuss, a great publication that you have engaged with the research that you have done. So now I want us to get to start to talk about the book. I understand this is an open access textbook, and what you simply do is to break down to the readers how the food system works, incorporating a lot of different aspects of the agricultural production chain, agribusiness itself, markets, nutrition, and health. I greatly appreciate the work that you have done. I read the reviews, and I felt that this was pretty good. Unfortunately, I don't have time to read all of them now for our viewers and listeners. But I want to give you the opportunity to just tell us briefly what you consider to be the core ideas of the textbook and its central argument.
I think the core idea for me is that food combined with economics is just much more than either of them. So putting the two together has been fascinating for me in my career, in my life. And, I've been doing this for a long time. In my case, 30 years, in Amelia's case, about 10 years. And we've done it in a lot of different schools. So I realized that we really had kind of a curriculum, a syllabus, a set of course slides, a way of telling the story that made a lot of sense, had been honed and adapted over the years. And we could do a book that would help students, help the general public just to read it, but maybe especially help instructors to adopt the book. So the core idea of the book is that you can have a single volume that spans, as you suggested, from agricultural production, natural resources, through agribusiness, to consumer behavior and health outcomes. And that single volume would both teach students how to think like an economist, what we call the principles of economics. That's the first half of the book, using the diagrams. So people have heard of supply and demand curves. People have heard of perhaps an indifference curve. And so we draw those, but always with an example about food. And those examples are stories that are often news stories or personal anecdotes. How my own food preferences changed over time, for example, or, and everyone I think can relate to those examples because everyone eats every day, if you're lucky. And many people have direct connection to farming, and many, many people have worked in restaurants or grocery stores and so forth. So this is something, the first half of the book is teaching economics through the examples of food. The second half of the book is how does food systems work? What data do we have? And here we're doing something that has been magical for me, which is to zoom way out. So I think of the food system as kind of like an elephant, like the story of a group of blind people trying to explain or understand what an elephant is. you go close to the elephant, you might feel the elephant, you would know exactly, you'd be close to it, you'd know exactly what it is, but you're only holding one part of the elephant. So you think of it as a certain thing, but it's not, you can't see the whole. So it's only possible to experience the food system in its totality by zooming way out with data, with surveys. We have millions and millions and millions of interviews with people all around the world, where those interviews will take like 3 or 4 hours to fill out the survey, to measure the children, to do the pinpricks, to get the blood for anemia, to ask people their entire history of all of the pregnancies and births that a mother might have had. And similarly, for farming, we have very detailed data with remote sensing. So the central idea of the book is, can we zoom way out to get that satellite's eye view that the remote sensing offers, to get the personal stories of every one of the millions of people who have answered those questions? And that gives a really different perspective. It really is like, whoa, I thought the elephant was the part I was touching. I thought my experience was the important experience, the stories I've been told, my own family, the things I read. But when we zoom out and look at all the data, all the millions of women or men who've responded to these surveys and told their stories, we can look at that through data. So that's the second half of the book. So the core idea is think like an economist, and we'll talk more about what that is, and zoom out to look at all the data. And you see something magical, I think.
That's awesome. Over to you, Professor Melly.
Yeah, so the only thing I would add, and Will kind of already said this, but really the main point of the book for me too is just that food economics is for everyone, right? And you often will hear economics as a field, as a discipline defined as it's the constrained allocation of resources. So how do we allocate resources that are scarce, right? And when it comes to food, all of us are making choices multiple times a day. So the choices, which is what economics is good at analyzing, are very frequent, right? Everyone's making these choices, the producers, the consumers, right? The store owners, everyone's making choices multiple times a day. And the scarcity is damaging and deadly, right? So food economics is for everyone because of those reasons. And so for that, but also because our own well-being as a population, as well as the well-being of the environment, is really linked with the food system. And that's not through anyone's choice individually, but just how it is. And so I think that this book really does a great job of linking up population level well-being and health, as well as the health of the planet, and linking it together with the food system. So that part is pretty important as well.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. So now, what is the major contribution of the book to the discourse of agricultural economics and food policy, which is obviously their series that we are particularly interested in?
Yeah, so because this is a textbook, it is taking existing research and existing data and presenting it in a new, clear, concise, really synthesized way, as well as making sure that the material is accessible for people who have not ever taken economics classes before, or who even feel very comfortable about their mathematics skills. So we really wanted it to be accessible, and we wanted to be able to describe research. And so for us, it's not just like what's the most current research, it's like what has the whole group of food economists done over the last, hundreds of years, really, to really understand the food system. And how does that kind of tell us what food economics is today, and how we can then use those ideas to improve well-being in the population. So one of the biggest ideas I think that comes from the book has to do with this overall population well-being, because one of the major threats to population health or population well-being is poor quality diets, right? And you probably hear about this a lot in the news, right? There's discourse about ultra processed foods being bad for your health, and there's high rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease, all of which these non-communicable diseases do have several causes, but one of them is poor quality diets, and that's a really big one.
Mhm.
So, teaching in a global health department, I think a lot about population level health, but like I'm talking to my students, I'm talking to my patients, and they're like, well, yeah, I know I need to eat more vegetables, or
Mhm.
I know I need to eat more fruits, or I know I need to eat less fast food. But like, I don't see how I can do that with my current situation, right? Whether it's logistical, kitchen space wise, financial, time wise, uh, lack of availability of ingredients, lack of cooking knowledge. There are so many factors besides just knowledge about what you should eat that go into how you can eat in the real world, right? So, we want to improve diets in the population, but it's very difficult to do so for many reasons because there are many constraints on what people can really do. And there's also not really a lot of great science on, I guess I should say, there's no one healthy diet, right? There's no one healthy diet for everyone. You can have a healthy diet in a lot of different ways. And we have really good science actually on certain ingredients and certain nutrients that in excess can be harmful to health, such as sodium, such as saturated fat, such as added sugar, right? So those are maybe three examples where in order to kind of improve health by reducing the intake of those ingredients, what really needs to happen is more government regulation of the food system, right? Because it's in the food system, it's convenient. In some cases, it's more affordable to eat those things than to not eat those things. People are facing a lot of challenges to their time and their mental power, right? And so they need some help to make sure that, oh, this bag of chips that they're getting does not have so much sodium that eating them repeatedly is going to be harmful to their health, right? So I think it is trying to, the book, one of the ideas of the book, right, is trying to get across that even if we have some great knowledge about nutrients and in excess or in deprivation, what they can do to the body, getting to those policies that are going to create population level well-being is complicated and tricky, and you need all these economics principles to do it right and make sure you don't get any unintended side effects of any policy that you do pass. So from a population well-being perspective, that's sort of what I think about as being really important for the book, but Will might have some other ideas as well for that.
I came to nutrition late in life and only started learning about it when I went really to the Friedman School of Nutrition and with my colleagues and so forth. And the story that Amelia just told was eye-opening to me in my 14 years at the Friedman School. But I would just emphasize a different contribution of the book, which is that I've been privileged to be part of a big global project called the Agriculture Nutrition Health Academy, which is funded by the UK government and by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the Gates Foundation has an open access policy in place until the end of this year, until the end of 2024, that people who work on these projects can have their open access fees funded by the foundation to make their work globally accessible. So Amelia and I decided that this was just a huge opportunity to not take any royalties from the work. This is work done nights, weekends, evenings, long bouts of effort to try to pull together all the notes and the course materials. And as Amelia said, all the literature. We have a previous handbook chapter that has like 300 references. So we have, previous book length handbook chapter that surveys the literature, but to tell the story in this new way took a lot of time. And it just was crazy to charge people so much money for each copy. So making it open access. And the short link to this is bit.ly, bit.ly/food econ book. So capital F food, capital E econ, capital B book. bit.ly/food econ book. And that gives you free open access to what I hope people will find is accessible and attractive. So that's a big contribution, thanks to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
That's exciting.
Definitely, yes.
Thank you so much, viewers and listeners. I'll be sure to paste the links that Professor William just told us about. I'll paste them in the description panel on the upload for this video. So now let's get into the discussion of the findings of the book and what you consider to be the major lessons.
Yeah, so it seemed to me like we might just look at the book itself, if that's all right, and that I can do that very easily by showing you what happens when one enters that link, the bit.ly link that I just mentioned. So that's bit.ly food econ book, all one word. And if you type that, so I'll do that now, it looks like that, and that will take you directly to the book itself. So this is published by Springer, by the particular part of Springer that's called Palgrave Macmillan, that has many textbooks. And as you can see, there's a lot of access and use of this. So the book appeared in May. We're now recording this in July. Already 53,000 people have been able to access it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 53,000 over all of the chapters. So if I scroll down here, you see some material. You can search within the book here. So that's like take advantage of the fact that it's electronic instead of just on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then anyone can click on any of the chapters
Mm-hmm.
and see them on any device.
Mm-hmm.
So on a phone or a tablet, you can also download the PDF
Mm-hmm.
of that particular chapter,
Mm-hmm.
or you can download the entire book for use on your laptop or phone or any other device.
Mm-hmm.
The EPUB file is very useful if you have a tablet or even a phone, and you can use any of the e-reader apps, like a Kindle app, not the Kindle, I mean, you can use a Kindle device, but you can also just save this to your Kindle or to your Nook device or to your phone or any other tablet.
Mm-hmm.
So what we can do with this is just look through the entire book and share and think about, what do you get out of this when you go through it?
Yes.
So I want to just start very quickly with the cover, and then a little bit about the opening of the book. So this is a photograph I took in Uganda, visiting a farmer who was very entrepreneurial.
Mm-hmm.
And she had chickens, and she had quite substantial amount of land and a lovely granary. And I said, just, can I take a picture of these corn cobs?
Mm-hmm.
Corn, maize, is an astoundingly plastic product. There's enormous plasticity, meaning that it can, when it grows, it can be bred to grow under so many different ways. And then it has so much versatility as a product to give us oil, to have the cake then after the oil is fed to animals, the grain itself, of course, fed to animals, and forms many delicious foods, starting with nsima or sadza,
ugali,
just as a pounded porridge that you would first cook down to get the starch out, and then add in more and beat to get it nice and fluffy and easy to eat. It's a really delicious kind of food, actually. Takes a lot of time to cook, but it's quite delicious, and everything else. So I want to start there, and then share that I, at one point, had the opportunity to write a poem about food, which is the prologue to the book. So it's this book in verse is the prologue to the book, and it kind of encapsulates, in some sense, my kind of experience of. So we're trying to tell a story that's quite personal, that I hope is fun to read and interesting, and that starts at the beginning. So chapter 1, when you look at it through a browser like this, you can just jump straight. Amelia, do you want to start with introduction?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. The book definitely, yeah. It is a personal book too because I mean Will and I both love food and also we do kind of sprinkle in some personal stuff about food in the book, which I think is really nice. But yeah, so the intro, in the introduction, you'll learn about why economics is such an important and useful way to learn about the food system.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll also learn about why food is a great topic to learn about economics, right? It goes both ways. And we talk about how food economics really started at the very beginning of economics, and we define economics in the introduction as well. So yeah, the introduction will kind of get you. It'll also get you set in terms of the types of material that you're going to see in the book. So we do analytical diagrams and data visualization, right? So like Will was talking about, to understand the material in this book, having high school geometry and high school algebra will be important. But you won't need to know calculus, you won't need to know real analysis, you won't need to know linear algebra, right? So we're thinking about like geometry, so diagrams with lines and curves that intersect together. And when Will scrolls down to chapter 2, he'll show you some examples of that. And so that's really the first half of the book is heavy on those, where you can learn the theory of economics and the principles of economics. And then the other type of material that you'll see is the data visualization. So in the introduction of the book, we also talk about kind of how to read those types of charts and what they're going to look like. So you're kind of ready for that.
And then to dig in, we go straight to the beginning of individual choices. So
Mm-hmm.
in the book, each chapter has a topic that could be suitable for a single week of a class, potentially to
Mm-hmm.
do quickly,
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes 2 weeks of a class.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 2 sections in each chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and a casual reader can just flip through the book to see what they might find of interest
Okay.
and dig in wherever. And there'll be references to previous things that they could follow and find, and there'll be references to later things, but you don't need to read it from beginning to end.
Mm-mm.
It does happen to be structured in the exact sequence of the course I teach. So it begins at the beginning with individual choices.
Mm-hmm.
And individual choices starting for consumers, which we draw in this way that Amelia just described, where as we explain the decisions that people have to make, as Amelia said, every day, often under a lot of stress, often under real scarcity of time, but especially money, often foods that they would want are not actually available. So there's a lot of choices and trade-offs. And economists use this kind of diagram, and that's explained in the text. If you're in a course situation, a classroom situation, your
Mm-hmm.
instructor would, even if they know nothing about food, would know
Mm-hmm.
exactly how to draw this
Mm-hmm.
as an economist. They would be able to explain it in a regular economics, Econ 101 type course. They would use the example of widgets. And they
Mm-hmm.
would say, oh, we're going to pretend this is bottles of wine and this is units of cloth. But those aren't real examples. In the book, we try to say, well, this is actually broccoli, or this is actually all vegetables, or this is actually all something else. And then we turn to the choices of producers. So this could be, in my class, I actually do an entire week and a half on the consumer, and then 1 week on the producer. And the producer choices are drawn in the same way. So you remember the previous curve was going in the other direction. This curve is bowed in, and the other curve was bowed out.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have for the individual choice diagrams is a way of just using geometry, as Amelia said. No need for any algebra, just the tiniest little bit of algebra to get the math. But you don't really even need the diagrams. You can just read the text and
Yeah.
get the basic idea.
Mm-hmm.
So then we turn to adding up all the individuals to get society.
Yeah, chapter three. So yeah, chapter two is all about individual choices, right? And that might not be an individual person, but it could be a firm or a farm. But then once everyone has made choices, all these choices kind of add up and they give us an equilibrium. And that is where we explore, that's what we explore in chapter three. So in chapter three, we're going to get to supply and demand, starting with supply and demand in what's called perfectly competitive markets. And one of the things that I really like about how we did the book is something that I say in class all the time is like, okay, guys, I know that perfectly competitive markets, we don't really see them very often, but we have to study them because of X, Y, and Z reasons, right? They're a baseline case to kind of examine when it goes wrong, right? And in the book, we really take that approach as well. And I think it's so important, especially for the food system, because a lot of things can interfere with perfect competition or in the food system how it is now. So what you'll learn is how to draw and use supply and demand diagrams to explain and predict market outcomes. And by market outcomes, we mean prices and quantities. So the prices that foods are being bought and sold for and the quantities that they're being the quantities that are being bought and sold. So that's chapter three. We do supply and demand under perfect competition. And then we also look at elasticities and how responsive consumers or producers are to changes in price. And there's some very deep and old findings in economics that are very relevant today in terms of elasticity. Mainly that goods that are necessary goods that you really have to live are very have very inelastic demand. So what that means is that even if the price were to increase by a lot, people would really still have to consume about the same amount. They couldn't really change it much because they really need it, right? Like food. And so we explore some of the implications of those types of goods. And this is one of the reasons why food is kind of a unique good. Um, uh, Out of all the types of goods you can buy and sell, food is unique in that way, is that it's necessary for life. But yeah, chapter three, all about markets, supply and demand diagrams, moving them around, what happens, when there's a shock to the market that might change supply or demand, and you can learn how to change those curves.
And these examples are all drawn from the news. Um,
Yes.
and one thing I'm especially proud of about the book is that we go directly into complicated questions of market failure. We don't pretend that perfectly competitive markets are what people see. Nothing is perfect in life,
Mm-mm.
but perfection is an interesting ideal to think about. And so we move directly from the perfect competition example to think about social welfare. Chapter four is how do you add up all these people and think about does their experience mean that a given society is in some sense better off? It's obvious if you go to a very wealthy place that people are living a long time, they're having a nice time at the cafe, they go to the theater, they seem very happy. And if you do surveys, they're very happy and so forth. And if you go to a very, very low income place, so something's going on here and we try to understand it. So the key thing is to get right into the difficult parts, politically difficult, sometimes even emotionally difficult, to add up different people to get an idea of what we call economic surplus, overall well-being of society as measured by consumer and producer surplus, and then immediately look at the unintended side effects of what's going on in the market. So consumer and producer surplus is just the people buying and selling. They're bystanders who are experiencing the emissions of pollution and carbon and carbon and methane and climate change. There's people who are experiencing the diminishment of the water, depletion of water supplies. There's people who are experiencing all the unintended consequences of the market activity. So we put that in right away. And then we get to chapter five. Amelia, you want to say a little bit about this?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, another way, right, besides externalities that markets can go wrong, right, or they can have effects that are not really intended, is when there's only one seller, right? And a lot of us have heard of this before, probably a monopoly. So if a company has a monopoly, that means that they are the only seller of that good. So we review kind of the economic theory behind monopoly market power, as well as monopsony power, which is when there's only one buyer of something. And it's not usually, I mean, it is relevant in other things besides the food system, but it's particularly relevant in the food system because there's so many smallholder farmers in the world who are trying to sell their product and it might be difficult or more difficult than it should be because there's a monopsony buyer. And so we cover monopoly and monopsony in chapter 5. And of course, just like everything, like it's rare actually to have a perfect monopoly or to have a pure monopoly or a pure monopsony. So in the second part of chapter 5, we look at strategic behavior between firms that's really relevant for oligopoly, um, meaning that the market for something is controlled by just a few firms. And that's the case in a lot of food system markets, especially for technology and seeds. And agricultural inputs too, as well as like food manufacturing and food service, institutional food service, firms. So this is our market power chapter, and we go from like a pure monopoly example, which again, rare in real life, but we need to know that base case, to also like how do things really work out in terms of the game theory. So we
Mhm.
have 2 by 2 tables that have different payoff matrices to indicate like, okay, well, if my opponent, right, in this game of in this oligopoly game is going to behave a certain way, then I should do this other thing in order to maximize my payoff, right? And so we go through those choices about how those games are going to play out in this little game theory chapter here.
And there's, a lot of insight that you get from that that leads directly to what governments do.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
So this is actually the last week before our midterm break. So this is the entire first half of the class of principles of economics, ends with political economy, government.
Mhm.
Why do you
Mhm.
have government? The two halves of that are what does government do and what is the cost effectiveness of those actions? So that gives us a whole set of insights that when I teach the class, students leave for their break, their spring break, in those taking it in that semester.
Mhm.
They're off for a week, and they've got all of the tools before we then turn to the data. And our very first topic in the data is, I think what people would agree is our central preoccupation, is the central focus. Amelia, you want to say a little bit about chapter 7?
Yeah. So chapter 7 is about poverty. So poverty is, I think a lot of economists would say, a lot of food economists would say is the main barrier to healthy diets and health in general, right? And so many other things, right? So we did a very close picture of what poverty looks like and what it has looked like over time, over space and over time. The reduction in extreme poverty has been significant over the past 30 years, and also the ways of measuring poverty have improved. So we talk about the measurement of poverty, how that's challenging, how it can be improved. And then we have a lot of data on poverty and not just showing like poverty levels, but also inequality and inequity between groups, right? Which is a very important thing to show, right? That there is systemic differences between groups of people in terms of their risk of poverty, and how that then affects health. So poverty is very relevant to the food system. Um, because poverty, causes ill health, causes inability to eat high quality diets, which then feeds back into poverty again. So this is a really important first data chapter to have.
Yep. And in each case, we zoom out to all of the data that's possibly available, and we provide a guide to the data with links to the source of the data. So I think this is quite important for instructors, for students, for the general public. You could just click on this link and you'll go directly to where the data come from. Having seen that, we proceed to chapter 8 to tie it to health. because health is something you cannot buy directly. Health is a consequence of things, and people do not know what foods are healthy. You can't see, taste, or smell most of the relevant compounds that are in food. And even if you could, you wouldn't know how much they are, how the quantities that there are,
Or how
um,
much you
and
need.
and how much you need, right?
Mhm.
So you have to have some habits. You have to have some culture. Great grandparents who said you should have some vegetables because that's what worked for us over
Yes.
thousands of years. And of course, scientists discovered that your grandparents are often right, but not always right. There's many new things discovered. And so we look at data on how to bring how that lens of nutrition helps us to understand food choices. Then macroeconomics.
Yeah, macroeconomics. So the first half of the book is mainly microeconomics. So the study of individual choices, right? Macroeconomics is the whole, so the whole economy. So not just like what is the price of corn and the quantity of corn that's going to be bought and sold,
Mhm.
but what are overall price levels for corn and how have they changed over time? How many people are employed in the food system? So we look at a lot of data on the macroeconomy, and I think macroeconomists are having a very exciting life the last few years. And I think that this chapter is really nice because it really will help any reader learn about how the food system is relevant in all these different macroeconomic indicators. So, because it seems sometimes like it might be too abstract and too kind of far away for the macroeconomy to be relevant for the food system,
Mhm.
but it really is relevant for so many reasons. Price levels, employment. Um, recessions and right what is going to cause changes to prices and employment so that we really try to bring it to like what matters for the food system. So I really like that chapter for that reason.
And again, lots and lots of data, in each case, a
Yes.
link to it so you can see the most recent updated information. This is
Mhm.
a book about the internet, really. It's about the ability of
Nice.
people anywhere in the world to access this kind of thing, which I think is magic. It's very, very difficult, though, because your phone can get you anywhere and give you anything, which
Yes.
means it is a constant source of distraction.
Mhm.
So how do you manage that superpower of accessing things combined with constant distraction that subtracts from your ability to see? So um, after the macroeconomic chapter, we compare between countries. So that's international development.
Mhm.
Again, an enormous amount of data. When I say enormous, I mean millions and millions of people telling their story to an enumerator, to a data collector, to get figures like this,
Mhm.
to get figures like this. And what we do is to try to just tell the story of international development and change over time in this zoomed out manner so that people can see beyond their own life experience. Because the more you know about a particular thing, the more you think, the more you're at risk of thinking that that is the whole thing. And of course, the more you know about a particular thing, the more valuable it is to know that. I mean, it's very valuable to know about it, one particular thing. Yes, that's very important. But it can be extremely misleading because wherever you are is not normal. Wherever you are is just where you happen to be. It's not the average for the world. Um, and we conclude with two different chapters that aim to sort of tie things together.
Yeah.
Amelia, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. So globalization in the food system is everywhere. And it's definitely become more of the food system has become more globalized in the past 30, 40, 50 years. So in chapter 11, we do a nice review of international trade and value chains, meaning really how does the food get from soil to plate, right? And how does that affect prices? We look at transportation and storage and the kind of risks that come with that. And then we also look at how that might affect prices over time. So international trade is a really important buffer for food supplies. And this chapter is, I hope a good review of a lot of that theory that kind of explains why trade matters and why trade matters for prices and also for food security. Um, yeah. And chapter 12 is all about the future of food and sort of where we go from here. Um, right? Like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, one of the biggest challenges that I think people face all around the world is poor quality diets
Mm-hmm.
because they lead to a lot of health problems. And also, poor quality diets can lead to environmental problems as well. So all those things are connected. And so we review kind of the environmental and kind of agricultural side of things, as well as the individual like population level health side of things too. And in this kind of short last chapter, um, some new innovations that might be relevant. But really, we think that the future of food is definitely up to the reader, right? And that I would want them to take from this chapter that they should go work in the food system however they see is the best way to do so and to make kind of the most productive and useful improvements and change the way that they see is needed because there's a lot of people doing a lot of great things and they're smart.
Yep. And we have a little epilogue that ties together the book in terms of that opening poem, just kind of explaining
Okay.
a little bit
Mm-hmm.
in order to, I hope, provide this single volume
Mm-hmm.
that a member of the general public, anyone can just flip through and just find a spot and just start reading. And I hope our explanations are clear. I hope our explanations cover a lot, so it's very dense,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you would read and then you might go back and read again if you wanted to stay in one part of it. But you could also read the entire thing. And if you're an instructor, you could teach just the first half, you could teach just the second half, and you could pick and choose as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we've tried to do in the book.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you very much for that breakdown. I believe that it will be of great benefit to our student audience. So now I understand that the target audience was very clear when you were writing this book. You had teaching in mind, you had the academia, you had the school system in mind. Would you briefly talk about, the target audience or the possible classes that can be taught using the textbook?
Yeah, so yes, this book could be used for any class that takes an economics perspective of the food system. So depending on the particular course, it might be, more of the book being used for that course or just a few chapters, right? But there's a lot of undergraduate and graduate programs in the United States and around the world that are, agricultural economics and food economics, right? But also food systems, sustainable agriculture, nutrition, public health, nutrition, food security, global food security, right? All these types of courses. And there's more and more programs and degree opportunities for students in these areas. So I think that depending on the exact course, an instructor might be able to choose certain chapters, or they would use a lot more of the book if it was like an economics class, right? But really, any class that would be taking an economics perspective of the food system could use this book. I use it at the undergraduate level. Will uses it at the graduate level. It's designed for students who do not have any prior training in economics, which a lot of students studying the food system do not have. So, you don't have to have students who have a lot of comfort with economics yet, right? Because we start from the very beginning. So yeah, it's really for everyone. I think also just professionals in the field in the food system could maybe enjoy the book as well. Food policy experts, food policy analysts, food journalists might even get some insights from it too. There's some amazing food journalists out there, and I think it could be useful to a lot of people who are just using it to learn about the food economy.
And I would just add a couple of things. First of all, there's a lot of great economists out there
Mhm.
Yes.
who don't know much about food. because we don't teach how food system works for people. You go to a liberal arts college, a sort of general education experience, you would not learn how food works. So economists can just pick it up and start teaching a class on food economics.
Yep.
And I think that's extremely valuable, I hope, for many people who wouldn't know much about food to start teaching it. And similarly, people who know a lot about their subject within food, but maybe not that much economics, they can rely on the book to provide the economics.
Yeah, students are really interested in food. I think like all my students, like kind of regardless of what they're majoring in, they're into food. They want to talk about it. They want to take classes in it. They want to maybe work in the food system when they graduate. So yeah, I think the book will be useful in a lot of degrees and degree programs and courses.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Amelia and Professor William. Our viewers and listeners, I was excited to have this discussion. This book, entitled Food Economics, Agriculture, Nutrition and Health, was published by Palgrave Macmillan. You can access it. It is an open access textbook that you can access right on the link that I'm going to paste in the description panel on the upload for this video. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and I hope that you have a good day.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Anotida.
That's excellent. Thank
Bye.
you.